All right, so let's talk about storage in our EC2 instance, also referred to as instance stores. So go ahead and watch that video. You can pause our lecture video as you watch this one on the slides. So once you're done with that video, let's discuss a few vocab words that they mentioned. So instance stores, what is an instance store volume? So an instance store volume in AWS is a type of ephemeral storage. So what does that word mean, ephemeral? Ephemeral means temporary. We'll talk about what makes it temporary. But essentially, an instance store volume is ephemeral or temporary, and it's physically attached to an EC2 instance. So it provides temporary block level storage that's ideal for workloads requiring low latency, high throughput disk access. So because this storage is attached to our instance, it's going to have low latency, meaning low delays in accessing that data. High throughput means you can transfer a lot of information from the storage to the instance because they're connected. And it's ephemeral because if that instance stops, terminates, or even fails, that data is going to be lost. So the lifespan of the storage is tied to the lifespan of the instance. So it's definitely not ideal, right? If you want to store something here long term, you're definitely going to need to have the information backed up if it's important, because stopping, terminate, maybe you won't stop or terminate, but failure is always a possibility, right? So just a little bit of a look at instance stores. So we have our Amazon EC2 instance. It's attached to our instance storage or instance store volume. So this is the one holding the data. This might be, for example, video rendering data, right? It might be images, all sorts of things, right? Depending on what your application is doing. If you're a store, right, a retail store, maybe this might be like a catalog of your products. So an Amazon EC2 instance with an attached instance store is running. If that instance stops or terminates, then all the data in the instance store will be deleted. So not ideal, right? So there are different options we'll explore, right? If you do want non-ephemeral or more permanent storage of that data. One example is going to be block storage. And Amazon has the Elastic Block Store service for that option. So first, let's define block storage. So block storage is a data storage method where data is divided into fixed size blocks and stored separately. Right from the actual, for example, EC2 instance. Each block has its unique identifier, allowing for fast retrieval and modification. So we're still going to benefit from low latency and high performance. Maybe it's not going to be as lightning fast, right, as the instance store, but it's definitely going to be competitive with those kinds of speeds. So each block operates independently, making it highly efficient for structured workloads. It can be attached to a server as a virtual disk, so it doesn't have to be physically attached. It could be virtually attached, right? So we can give our instances block storage without worrying if the instance goes down, the block storage will still remain. So it's going to support snapshots and backups. So that's important if you want to have multiple copies of your data, if you want to bring up previous versions at a later time. So it's commonly used for applications requiring fast, consistent access to data. And of course, that's if you don't want your data to disappear. It's persistent is kind of the big talking point of block store. So Amazon Elastic Block Store is a service that provides block storage. So it's going to be a persistent block storage service designed for use with Amazon EC2 instances. So if you stop your EC2 instance, all the data on the EBS volumes is another word for the storage, right? So remains available because the data is stored independently from the instance. So they're not physically attached to the instance. We do create like a virtual connection, right? So that the EC2 can access the data. But as far as physically being attached, it's not. And so the benefit of not being physically attached is that block storage, if that instance goes down, that data will persist. It's not going to go anywhere. It can be moved easily between instances as well. And then, of course, supports backups of EBS volumes. And you can create snapshots. So backups, right, is if you want to bring back a previous version of that data, and snapshot is if you want to take kind of a picture, right, of the current status, the current state of that data. So yeah, a snapshot is a point in time copy of a storage volume. So snapshot, right? Maybe you took a snapshot last week, right? Maybe you can set up automatic snapshots, right? So it takes a snapshot every month. So each snapshot is going to capture a single point in time for that storage volume state. A backup is a full copy of data of that storage that's stored separately for recovery in case of failure, accidental deletion, or corruption. Definitely something you want to do, right, with important data. If something happens, right, to the block store, to a particular snapshot of your block store, the ability to back up previous versions, right, is really, really useful. And then we have incremental backups. So this is a special type of backups. So incremental backups are basically going to check, hey, I already backed it up last week. I'm going to see what changes have happened since I backed it up. And instead of backing up the entire data set, I'm just going to back up the new changes. So incremental backup is like syncing up your storage to the newest changes. And then EBS snapshots. So of course, if we can do snapshots right, we have to talk about how EBS takes those snapshots. So EBS snapshots, again, a point in time backup of an Amazon Elastic Block Store volume. So as we discussed, EBS does support snapshots. They are always going to be incremental, and this is going to help reduce storage costs, right? So instead of copying the whole thing, I'm just going to copy the newest changes. So for example, if I copied it last week and it had 2,000 records, maybe like customer records if I'm running a store, and then I try to back it up again this week, if there's only 20 new records, I'm not going to copy the entire 2020 records. I'm just going to update it with the 20 newest records and keep the 2000 that were already there. So that's an incremental backup. So EBS snapshots are incremental. They can be used to restore data, right? Create new volumes or migrate storage across AWS regions. Remember, you can transfer block storage between instances. You can automate these backups and these snapshots to make sure that your data is always, fresh and synced up. And in case of a failure, right, you can always pull back a previous version. The place that stores EBS snapshots is actually called Amazon S3, and that's going to be one of the big focus of this lesson. But before we get to Amazon S3, let's take a look at this diagram on EBS. So we have our EBS volume. That's where we're storing everything. On day one, right, we might back up some data, pretend maybe these are customer records, right? So we have 2 customer records here. And then on day 2, we have a new record, right? So instead of making a copy of all 3 stacks, we're just going to update it with this purple one, right? We're just going to say, hey, keep the 2 previous ones. We already have a copy of that. Just make a copy of this purple one. That's the only difference, right, from the last backup. And then day 3, we have another backup. Again, 211, they're already there. The newest data here is just on the 3s, right? These blue ones. So instead of copying the entire thing, we're just going to copy the top of the stack, right? This newest data. So yeah, incremental backups are characteristic of EBS snapshots. On day 1, right, 2 volumes are backed up. On day 2, 1 new volume is backed up. On day 3, adds the 2 extra new volumes. So instead of making copies of the entire thing each time, we're just taking the newest ones. All right, so next up is going to be Amazon S3.